USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Weekend Review podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com. A look at this weekend in college hockey and a review of the top news of the week.
Welcome to USCHO.com's Weekend Review podcast for Monday, February 15th, 2021, President's Day. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. And Jim, not a whole lot changed over the weekend. It was a pretty good weekend for the top teams in college hockey. And let's start right out with a team that seemed to have had a terrific weekend, and that's Boston College with a home-and-home sweep with UMass Lowell.
Yeah, and won two very different games. They dominated the first night, 7-1 victory at home, but then they went on the road, and Lowell obviously had some response, had some jump in them, found a way to jump out to a 2-0 lead. But interestingly, it wasn't the BC power play, which has been pretty potent at times and has a lot of guns. It was 4-on-4 hockey, matching penalties midway through that game, and BC scored twice. It's like the open ice, of a 4-on-4 can be sometimes more beneficial. Your opponent's still trying to score a little bit more maybe than they are when they're shorthanded. So BC took advantage of that, scored twice, and then they, a 2-2 game going to the third, and BC scored right off the opening face-off of the third period. Norm Bazin kind of mentioned that his team was a little bit flat at that time, and that's kind of frustrating to him. But for BC, they grabbed a 4-2 lead, hung on, 4-3 victory. You get the points however you can get them. Two very different wins, but they both count just the same.
Another team that came away with a pair of victories is North Dakota. Now, we've talked about Denver being a good team that's not getting the results. 3-0 and 5-2 wins for the Fighting Hawks over the visiting Pioneers. Denver's going to have to win that league for the postseason in the NCAA. North Dakota, no matter how they decide to pick teams, has certainly got its trip to the tournament of 16 sewn up. Fighting Hawks probably are not going to overtake Boston College for number one this week, but probably a solid number two, and still may be the best team in the country.
Still may be. It's hard to make that comparison right now. We know that Boston College is good. We know that North Dakota is good. There's a few other teams you can throw into that mix. Minnesota State, Minnesota, all of them very good clubs. I think we have pretty definable data to say that, but it's hard to tell how good North Dakota is. They are playing excellent hockey, though. They're going on the road. They're winning games. They're winning at home. They're finding ways to win close games. They're finding ways to pull away from opponents, as they did this weekend. Not just play 1-goal games. I like everything that's happening for this North Dakota team right now, and I feel like this was one of the weeks that rarely happens where every one of the top teams win, but I still had a hard time picking who I was going to have first on my ballot, because last week, despite the fact that BC retained the number one ranking, I actually had North Dakota number one. And then I looked at this weekend, I said maybe BC is the better team, and I ended up putting them one on my ballot this week. It's so close. I think we're splitting hairs. So 1, 2, and 3 right now, I think all of them are pretty solid teams, and we're going to see it in the poll. It'll probably be close. It'll probably be another ballot where you have BC holding on by 15, 20 points in the to that top spot, which is basically just 10 people changing their mind or something like that. But I think you have two teams right now, at least, maybe even more, when you look at the way Minnesota played this weekend, and I think you've got a lot of teams up at the top that are solid.
I had North Dakota number one last week and also this week, and I couldn't change it because I thought, Lowell and Denver, probably pretty similar teams in talent level, both maybe not getting the results that they would like with what they've got. So I kept them the same. But yeah, I have to agree it was a toss-up. But let's go to Minnesota State. They had a Thursday-Friday series down in Alabama, a 4-1 win on Thursday and a 5-0 win on Friday against Alabama Huntsville, giving up just one goal on the weekend. And we talked last week about Dryden McKay's numbers. And for years, people were saying, if you're ever going to get a goalie to win the Hobey Baker Award, he needs to have Ryan Miller numbers. Well, now we need to talk about Dryden McKay numbers. 8 shutouts in 14 games compared to 10 in 40 games for Miller. But then these numbers, a .79 goals against and the .959 save percentage, those are just gaudy, otherworldly type numbers for a goaltender.
If you're playing Minnesota State and you have any hope to beat them right now, you better hope that you win a 1-0 game. And that seems to be the only formula you could think of when Dryden McKay's in net. He just isn't giving up anything. You go through his last 10 starts and he basically is giving up less than a goal a game, which obviously you just mentioned, a .79 goals against average. He's pulling out a shutout almost every weekend right now. And coming close sometimes, you go back a week and he was, a few minutes away from double shutouts. I mean, these numbers are off the charts. And it's not like he is playing just weak opponent after weak opponent. This is the WCHA. You've got some really good teams in there. He's beaten those teams. He's shut some of those teams out. This is as good of hockey as we've seen at the goaltending position in a long time. I mean, there's great goaltenders in the country right now. I look at Spencer Knight, what he's accomplished this year, both in college and obviously at World Juniors. I think Jack LaFontaine at Minnesota is phenomenal. We have some good goaltenders out there in the country, and I am already very prepared to carve Dryden McKay's name into the Mike Richter Award. Give that one to him. But he should really be in this Hobey conversation. I mean, these are unworldly numbers.
Meanwhile, Minnesota, you mentioned them after the 2 losses, one of them extremely lopsided last weekend to Wisconsin. It seemed like Bob Motzko in the postgame press conference was even a little bit gobsmacked by what had happened and said, hey, we got to even out the keel. We've got to right the ship. We got to figure out things. Seems like they did a pair of 3-0 shutouts at Notre Dame over the weekend.
Yeah, I watched, I believe it was the first of those 2 games. I had a chance to watch a couple of periods of that. They did a great job. I mean, you mentioned good goaltending. They got good goaltending. They also shut down a Notre Dame team that has plenty of firepower, and they found ways to limit their chances, especially the grade A area. Anything that Notre Dame was getting on for the most part was from the outside, and then they chipped away, found ways to score goals. They got some greasy goals on Friday. I liked everything about what happened for Minnesota this weekend. They are a solid team. We know that they bounced back after really the only real adversity. I mean, they've had losses throughout the season. They've even lost 2 games in a row throughout earlier in the season, but they got thumped by Wisconsin. There's no way around that. So they needed some sort of a response, and they gave that response this weekend. They can be proud of that, and that should solidify how they are as a team, not how we're perceiving them as a team, but they should have a lot more confidence after this weekend.
Let's stick with the Big Ten before we take a break. Michigan and Wisconsin, it was a split. Mel Pearson has been platooning goaltenders, and you have to wonder with the results of this weekend, does he start to zero in on one, or does he keep the alternation going?
It's interesting. I talked to him after the win on Saturday, and that was the first of the 2 games. Victory, Eric Portillo was in net, and I said, you've got Strauss, man, who Mel has talked a lot about how strong man is and how great of a goalie he is. I said, how do you come off a 21-day layoff, which is what they had, play in a team like Wisconsin, easily one of the best teams in the country, and you start a rookie in this game. And he said, you know what, I was driving into work a couple of days ago, and I saw a billboard, and it had Eric Portillo on it. It was an electronic billboard. It was kind of, promoting this weekend's games. And he said, well, that was my sign. I mean, Mel is Mel. He's a great personality and so pleasant to deal with. But he also, I said, are you superstitious? And he said, aren't we all a little bit? He's like, anybody that's in hockey has a little bit of superstition. So he played Portillo and then knew he was giving the second start to Strauss-Mann. They win with Portillo. They lose with Mann. I don't know if that just takes Strauss-Mann out of a rotation suddenly. That's too good of a goaltender to just sit. But it is interesting. Portillo, watching that game, he saved the Wolverines' bacon early in that game. Wisconsin was buzzing. I think they had 8 of the first 9 shots in the game. They were up 1-0 at that point. And then suddenly, he makes a few key saves. You get into the second period. Michigan explodes in the second period, gets 4 goals, and ends up with a 5-1 victory. But, everything about Portillo looked good. I didn't see all of Sunday's game. And Strauss-Mann, we know he's a very good goaltender. I don't think that, another weekend where, Portillo gets a win should change too much in Mel Pearson's mind.
I do have one correction for Mel Pearson, though. Everybody in hockey's not a little superstitious. Everybody is a lot superstitious, although I like to tell people it's not superstition, it's tradition. But really, do you know any sport, maybe baseball pitchers, but is there any other sport where superstitions and routines have to be followed as closely as it is in hockey?
I've heard it more in hockey. There's no doubt about that. But Mel went on to say, he's like, I don't take the same route to the office every day. I don't wear the same tie when we're on a winning streak. I'm not that superstitious, but you see a sign, it was a sign. Literally, it was a sign. So, I liked that approach and that explanation, unapologetically too.
Yeah,
that's Mel Pearson for you.
Well, his superstition is he can't take the same route to the office every day. Anyway, let's take a break and we'll come back with more of USCHO's Weekend Review.
This is the USCHO Weekend Review podcast from US College Hockey Online.
This is the Weekend Review podcast from USCHO. I'm Ed Trefzger with Jim Connelly. And Jim, what a rough weekend, as you describe it, a lost weekend for Minnesota Duluth to Western Michigan, 4-0 and 4-1 wins for the Broncos.
And we had mentioned on our Game of the Week podcast last week how tight things were, going into the weekend in the standings. And, because of that, not only did Minnesota Duluth lose a lot of ground on North Dakota, but they got passed by both St. Cloud State and Omaha. They're now in 4th place in the NCHC. And, right now, if that was the playoffs beginning, they'd be facing Denver in a single elimination quarterfinal game. That is not an enviable situation. Western, they're a team that I just can't always figure out. Sometimes you get some great efforts, then sometimes it just seems that they have some of their weekends where they're really off. And obviously this weekend, Alex Aslanidis was strong in net, picks up both victories for them. Rookie goaltender. His numbers are improving. He's got a 3.03 goals against average and 882 save percentage. That's not going to win a lot of popularity contests. But his numbers keep getting better, and he pulls out a big weekend against a very good Minnesota Duluth team that just found problem scoring goals. And, whatever it may be for Duluth right now, they've just got to start righting the ship, because I don't think that we're going to see them. There's enough distance between them and Denver. I don't think we'll see Minnesota Duluth drop below 4th in the standings. But at this point, the thought that you could end up playing Denver one game to go on to the Final Four in the league is a little daunting.
It's one of the things that I think coaches, if they could figure out, and I know that's why you have sports psychologists, but it's got to be one of the most mystifying things for being a head coach when you see a team as a team perform at a lower level than they're capable of, whether it's playing a little soft or just not being able to click on passes. There just happen to be nights where the whole team seems to be just a little off, and other nights where nothing can go wrong. I suppose that's been one of the mysteries of coaching for decades.
It's a frustration point, and I think, I've talked to enough coaches about stuff like this, that when you're sitting there on the bench and watching, your team, I'm not going to use the word self-destruct, but just, not even perform near a level that you expect, it's frustrating. And, some coaches, I think they have a vibe of their team. They know what they're getting almost before a game starts because you've had a week of practice and things were sloppy and guys just didn't seem focused and that sort of stuff. And sometimes those are kind of self-fulfilling prophecies. They end up coming true that you're just not in the right state of mind and you don't play well. But then you hear coaches say, I don't understand how this happened. We were so sharp all week. We were playing perfectly in practice. Our guys were paying attention to details, hitting passes, whatever it might be. And then you show up on a weekend and it's all gone. And it's beyond explanation sometimes. A lot of the times you usually can credit your opposition that they might have played better, but the nights where you just watch your team out there not perform anywhere near their capabilities has to be so frustrating for a coach.
Well, there are some teams where things have got to be very pleasing to their coaches, and let's hit on some of those. Boston University had a weekend sweep of Vermont. They may come close to the top 10, might sneak in there in today's poll, but this is a Boston University team that was having trouble getting games played and was on the verge of dropping out of the poll a few weeks ago.
Yeah, they're now 8-2 overall in the season. They are in a position where I believe they have the third best winning percentage in the country. Only Minnesota State and AIC stronger winning percentage. Now they still have to get some games played. They, if you go into the postseason, so let's say 10-4 or something like that, and then you put a couple of wins together, and maybe lose a game, or you finish at 10-6, whatever it may be. They could, you could be eliminated, in your first playoff game in Hockey East. Everything's single elimination this season. So, if you're a 10-5 team, do you make the NCAA tournament? That's a tough question. I would tend to say yes. I mean, 67 winning percentage is going to put you somewhere around, top 10, top 12 in the country. I think this is a good BU team. They're finding ways to win. They're actually battling a lot of injuries right now and still winning games. So I think that is what is probably the most impressive for BU. But if they keep playing this way and they keep winning and get healthy, they're going to be a tough team to stop.
Michigan Tech has been hot. They've won 6 in a row, but they need a few more league games in there. But now overall 14-5-1.
You know what? It's been so easy for them to get lost in my mind this year, Michigan Tech, and I don't know why. Maybe it's because when they've lost games, they've kind of lost them in groups. Get swept on a weekend here, get swept on a weekend there. But I look at it, they've won 13 to 15 games right now. Their only 2 losses were a sweep at the hands of Bowling Green, and if I remember right, that was when Bowling Green was coming off of being swept, and they were as hungry as they could get. There's kind of some of those perfect storm moments that come together. But this team is on one heck of a roll right now, and I kind of couldn't keep them off my ballot this week when you realize that they've put together such a streak at this point, 6 straight wins. They end up, I think they were probably somewhere around 18 or 19 on my ballot. Looking at it, 18. I had them 18 on my ballot. So this is a Tech team that you just don't lose them on your radar. I mean, there feels like there's more of these teams in the WCHA than we all realize. I mean, everybody I think thought it was just Minnesota State and Bowling Green, but now you have both Michigan Tech and Lake Superior both playing well. So I think that there's a lot to be said for how many strong teams there are in this WCHA.
And speaking of Bowling Green, they got swept on the weekend, and they've gotten into a little bit of a bumpy road. They're going to drop quite a ways down the poll, but maybe this is just their time of the year to have that little sense of doldrums that they can work out of.
Yeah, I mean, still a 16-win team right now. They're 16-8 thus far, and you don't want doldrums, that's for sure. You'd like to have them if you're going to have them around this time, or maybe end of January. If you're going to have some of those reckoning moments, have them, at a time that you can kind of flip the switch and do so in a meaningful moment. Do it in the last week of the regular season to get yourself into a good position for whether it's home ice, top four, whatever it might be. And then at the same time, propel yourselves into a postseason. You've seen teams, we've seen a lot of teams do it over the years where they start playing their best hockey somewhere down the stretch. Boston College on a couple of their national championship runs did that. I remember 2008 was one where they, looked like they might have been eliminated from the Hockey East tournament in the first round, and then comes back, I think they got a late goal in one of the quarterfinal games, went on a run after that, never lost another game, won a national championship. So you want to, if you have some of those difficult moments, those reckoning moments, it's good to have them, late January, early February, then get the engine going into the postseason.
When we look at Atlantic hockey, everybody has been paying attention to AIC, and certainly with a 13-3 record, they're right up there. But Army has been hot, 7-0-1 in their last 8, 9-1-1 in the last 11. They started out 1-4 on the season, a sweep over Bentley, and they're a strong team. They will be battling for the championship in that league. Senior goaltender Trevin Kozlowski, 17th in the country in save percentage, or rather in goals against, and right up there in save percentage. The Army Black Knights are a team that is going to be maybe even in the finals in Atlantic hockey. Don't overlook them.
It's interesting with them. It was easy to write them off. I believe they started 1-4. And, I kind of, again, it's almost kind of like Michigan Tech where suddenly somebody fell off a radar screen for no reason. But they're back on now. When I look at 7-0-1 in their last 8, they're 9-1-1 in their last 11. They're only in 4th place in terms of a percentage of points earned in Atlantic hockey. But there's a caveat there because Canisius is sitting in 2nd place with only 8 games played. And I don't know, exactly how things will work out. We haven't really gotten into it, but, we heard this week at Hockey East, they put basically a power index together so that if teams played, gross proportions of numbers of games, where you might have a team with 20 games played and another team with 8, and then you might have a team that plays the first place team 4 times and a team that never plays the first place team. So Hockey East tried to put that into a formula, and they're using that for their standings. It almost feels like Atlantic hockey, maybe the WCHA, all 3 of those leagues, in my opinion, might need some sort of a power index as well, unless league members are just going to say, oh, we don't care where everybody finishes, let's just play a tournament. Because having Canisius right now in 2nd place with only 8 games played, to me is a little bit skewed. Now, if they lose 2 games anytime, they'll drop from 2nd place probably all the way down to 4th or 5th. But it seems a little skewing. Robert Morris is still in that picture. They're having a great season. We know that AIC is having a great season. But Army, right there, they have a nice lead over the next team, which is RIT. That's going to be hard to make up that ground. I mean, you're talking Army with a .667 winning percentage, and they've played, do my math here, 14 games. RIT's played 11. They're at .515 winning percentage. So it's going to be hard for them to lose 4th place, but I feel like Army could easily sneak up into 3rd place, maybe even 2nd place if Canisius and Robert Morris both falter.
I think you make a good point about some sort of a percentage index that would work in the WCHA, where everybody is going to end up playing everybody, or at least that's the intention. In Atlantic hockey, they split into 2 pods, so the 5 Western teams and the 5 Eastern teams will not play each other, and not everybody's going to play Air Force. So trying to do a percentage index in that league would be very difficult, and we still have not heard from the league office what the playoff format will be, whether there'll be a Final Four in a specific location. The women's counterpart to that league, the CHA, is going to play all their games single elimination at a municipal arena in Erie. So we're still waiting for that. And this kind of leads into our next question about intensity of the season with suspensions and supplemental discipline. There was no supplemental discipline on this, but in those 2 games that Army had against Bentley was heavily penalized. 9 penalties for 40 minutes on Friday, 2 major penalties in that, 9 for 37, 1 major in the second game, and one of the majors was served by a player both nights. On Friday night, there was a semi-veiled tweet from Bentley head coach Ryan Soderquist just before midnight, calling upon players at all levels of the game to respect the game and not try to do embellishment or diving, suggesting something he was unhappy with in the game that night. Some real lopsided stuff in penalties, but there have been some really rough ones, and leagues have been forced to send out supplemental discipline. 4 of them, if we're counting right, over the weekend. The season intensity is heating up, and I think also in cases where you're seeing the same teams a lot in a row, just some familiarity breeding contempt.
There's no doubt. And, my good friend and the former head of officials in hockey is Jen Shakti, always would say, I usually see him around the bean pod time, so the first couple of weeks of February, and I usually have something to ask him about. It's something that had just occurred that weekend. He said, you can tell it's getting toward the end of the season. Things are getting intense. You don't see these headhuntings and these bad hits from behind and the spearings and all that stuff in October and November. It's when players understand that every game matters. Their season's on the line. For seniors, sometimes their careers on the line, and they get a little bit more intense. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing these games get a little bit more intense. Now, when you mentioned Bentley specifically, their coach, that was an aggressively passive aggressive moment of Ryan Soderquist there, where you're sending out a tweet. Are you calling out the players on that? Are you calling out the officials on that? I mean, you've got a lot of good targets right there. But his team did end up with a lot of penalties throughout the weekend. I don't know. I didn't see either game, so that it's very hard for me to even kind of comment on it. But it's that time of year. Even coaches, you could say even coaches are really intense, and their frustration, maybe it boils over and you get a minor, or maybe it boils over and you send a tweet at midnight. So yeah, it's just that time of year. I think that we see it every season. This season probably even has more frustration because it's not just being frustrated with the officials, maybe being frustrated with your players. It's being frustrated of whether you can even stay on the ice. And Bentley had a long pause there with a bunch of cases, COVID cases. And so listen, I don't blame any coach for any level of frustration as this season comes toward a close. It has been a rough year. And but it's something we see every year. We see this level of intensity get here right around this time, middle of February. That there's probably 3 good weeks left in your regular season before you have to find a way to turn on the Jets in the postseason. That's what every team is faced with.
Well, let's be fair to the officials. You cannot call embellishment on a replay. If you call it when it happens, then it will stand. But when you go to review a penalty to see whether it should be a major or a minor, you cannot call a minor based on a replay. So even if you watch it, and even if you say, okay, look, that's going to be a major on this guy, you can't add the embellishment. So it's very difficult for an official, especially depending on the angle that they're looking at it, to call an embellishment right off the play. It's got to be, like I used to call him on the radio, a Louganis, Greg Louganis, the diver, who had fame in the Olympics. But it's going to be difficult to find that. And yeah, it is a sportsmanship issue. Yeah, it's also a sportsmanship issue to call it out. So I saw one view of the play that might have been involved. On the video stream, there was only one angle. You have to believe that the officials have more than one angle to look at, knowing that there's more than one camera in the arena. So I can't really comment on that, but I can understand the frustration, especially if you're a coach and 2 nights in a row, you've been heavily penalized versus the other team, giving up 7 power play opportunities and getting one yourself in one game. So I understand it. I don't think there's a good solution to that, and we certainly don't want to add more criteria to what they can look at in video.
No, I'm going to go back to Dan Shakti again. He and I had many conversations actually about divings and issues related to diving. Because when he got to Hockey East, now this is going back, I guess, 10, 12 years ago, he said to me, 5 months into the job, maybe 4 months into the job, that the diving was a pandemic, an epidemic in the league. Like, it was the worst thing he had ever seen in hockey, in his opinion. And he knew that it had to be corrected. And for him, it became individual phone calls to players and saying, okay, I see what you're doing out there. Cut it out, because the next time it won't be a phone call. Next time it'll be a suspension. And that was how he stopped it. And it really improved in Hockey East. I think that under, his leadership, diving went way down in that league. So that's something that it comes down to, maybe not the referees themselves. They're in a hard enough position, but I think the heads of officials in each league, I think it's incumbent on them not just to stand up for their officials, but to call out the players when they're doing something like that.
It's really about game management. And, how often does that come up in a game where you see a game maybe even get a little bit out of hand because it hasn't been managed well? And I think you've got to say that game management begins before the season starts, and you lay down expectations for what play should be like.
I totally agree with that. You nailed it right on the head there. You got to kind of come out really, really early on, if it's before the season or while the season's going on, right at the beginning. Nip things in the bud when you see them.
Well, that'll do it for this week's edition of Weekend Review. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you next time.
This has been the USCHO Weekend Review Podcast, a production of U.S. College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.